I started making videos on this channel because there'd been a lot on my mind in regards to music, especially heavy music, for quite some time, and I figured, what the hell? Let's throw something out there and see what happens. Then, somehow my first video blew up and is now sitting at almost 400,000 views, so I guess this is my thing now. That being said, although I do have a lot to say, and I'm only just getting started, I'm already getting tired of it. I don't want to be the guy who just hates modern metal or whatever. I said in that first video that I'm not trying to be the old man yelling at clouds, and I meant it. That's not who I've ever been. I've always been interested and curious about new things, even if it's not something that I personally enjoy. It's just that watching the music that I grew up on and love lose relevancy for the past 15 years has made me feel like something needs to be said. In fact, I think we should all be having more discussions about it. How did we go from being a part of mainstream culture to only guitar nerds caring about the music? That being said, I don't think that heavy music is doomed. So I wanted to make a few videos instead talking about what I think is looking up for heavy music and what is on the horizon that is worth looking forward to. And as I'm sure you're already aware, this video is about the growing Japanese girl metal scene. A scene that I've been keeping tabs on for a little while now. In fact, I even planned on talking about it in that first video, but after I rewrote that video a couple of times, I eventually removed that part, and I decided not to talk about it quite yet. Then, in my video on metalcore in the MySpace era, I mentioned that heavy music hasn't really had a big scene that shook things up since the MySpace era, and that I hope to see another one. And I think this might be exactly that. A fresh new scene that brings a new generation into the music with new ideas and influences and brings heavy music back into relevancy again. But first, as always, if you enjoy these videos, make sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends or your grandma, whatever. Follow me on my social medias, or if you're feeling generous, you can always tip me over on Ko-fi. Now, if you've been listening to heavy music for some time, you're probably aware that it's pretty much dominated by North America and Europe. There's some moderate popularity in places like Latin America, where you can find some pretty niche but interesting scenes in places like Botswana, but it's largely a North American and European thing. In regards to Japan specifically, while there's been a moderately successful J-rock scene on the softer side of things, the heavier side of rock and metal never really seemed to take off there all that much, with only a few notable bands like Dir Grey or Crystal Lake, and even less so in nearby countries like South Korea and obviously places like China or North Korea. Now, I find this to be kind of interesting considering just how influential the US has been on those two countries and vice versa since the end of World War II. The two nations having even adopted baseball as their national sport, which apparently they've introduced these like K-pop style dance cheerleaders or something. Now, what Japan has lacked in size and popularity, it's made up for in intensity and passion. There are some really interesting and experimental bands and scenes that have come out of the country, such as Boris and Hanatarash, and many others that I'm not going to go into here, but you can find all kinds of YouTube documentaries about some really weird Japanese punk, metal, and hardcore acts. However, starting in the early 2010s, there was a new wave of Japanese metal bands reaching larger audiences than before, with most of these new bands and artists being female bands. There's different names for this scene: Kawaii Metal, Idol Metal, Girl Metal, whatever. I'm not here to debate genre labels. What I'm interested in is the impact these groups could be having on the future of metal. And while many are quick to write off this stuff as nothing more than a flash-in-the-pan gimmick meant to appeal to weebs, I disagree. And I think there are some reasons why this could be the next big thing in metal and why you should be interested even if you don't personally like this stuff. So let's start with just a quick background and overview on this scene for those of you who are not familiar. Unlike most musical genres, which have complicated and multifaceted origins, the Kawaii Metal scene pretty much solely originated with the group Baby Metal in 2010. Baby Metal were started as a project by a man known as Kei Kobayashi, or Koba Metal, who had this idea to create an idol metal group. The founding members, Suzuka, Moa, and Yui, were previously a part of the idol group Sakura Gakuin. Side note, it's weird growing up watching shows like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, where kids go to a school based around a card game, and then you get a little older and you find out that Japan actually kind of does that. It's really weird. Anyways, the group would begin releasing music formally in 2012, but they would begin to blow up in late 2013 and early 2014, where they would start to get more international attention. I first heard of the group around that time, maybe even a little earlier. I can't remember exactly, but I do remember the reactions. Baby Metal was so unlike anything the metal world had heard up to that point. You know, it wasn't just Japanese metal, it was idol metal with J-pop mixed in. The songs were these really off-the-wall, chaotic fusions of multiple genres with 12-year-old girls singing about chocolate over metal breakdowns. And of course, this was something that the angry metal dorks just didn't quite know how to make heads or tails of. So there was a fair amount of hate and vitriol thrown at the girls, and the likes of, Rob Zombie, Mikhail Okerfeldt, and Rob Halford vouched for them. Following Baby Metal's viral popularity at the time, there were a few other groups that quickly popped up, obviously trying to capitalize on this crazy new idea. Probably most notably Lady Baby, which actually featured a buff white guy in a maid costume. But at this point, the scene was still quite new, a little rough around the edges, and definitely a little gimmicky. It was a fun novelty, but it needed more time in the oven. Baby Metal would coast through the 2010s, maintaining a moderate level of success and popularity, but then starting about 3 to 5 years ago, they would manage to achieve a second wind, taking off once again in the metal world. But this time around, the music and the girls had matured a little. It was still very much J-pop and idol music mixed with metal, but more refined and focused. At the same time, we also saw Hanabi pop off, who I think are the standout group of this whole scene. Now, in contrast to Baby Metal, who are an idol group, and as far as I'm aware of, do not write any of the material, Hanabi are an actual band. Alongside them, other groups like Passcode, Broken by the Scream, Bandmade, Nemophila, and Love Bites have also managed to garner quite the following. And I'm even starting to see a few Korean acts pop up. But even more broadly, on Instagram, I've been seeing more and more Asian women seemingly interested in heavy music.
I love mental music.
Now, that could just be my algorithm, specifically because I have been saving these videos since earlier last year. So maybe Instagram is just feeding me more and more of them because it thinks that I want them. But tentatively, it does seem like there could be a little bit of a demographic shift here. And I'm seeing these girls do covers of everything from Linkin Park to 3 Days Grace to Lorna Shore and Suicide Silence and so much more.
This is what you asked for, habits a crowd.
Or one of my favorites, this group EMNW, who have a cover of Limp Bizkit's Rollin'. Seeing Japanese girls cosplay as an early 2000s Fred Durst is definitely something. Now, there's a few reasons why I find this rising scene and possible demographic shift to be of interest. And as I said earlier, I think that if you like heavy music, you should also be interested in the scene, even if you don't personally enjoy this stuff, which includes myself. Now, I know with the way the internet is, especially in recent years, there's bound to be comments saying that I'm only interested in this stuff because I'm some brain-broken white boy smitten with yellow fever who's obsessed with Japan or whatever. First of all, I'm vaccinated. Secondly, I actually really don't listen to or watch much of any Japanese media, whether that be music, movies, anime, or even games. I'm not a weeb or otaku or anything like that. Not that I have anything against Japanese media, and there are some things here and there that I enjoy, like Hanabi or Resident Evil, it just doesn't generally appeal to me. So that isn't why I'm interested in this stuff. Over the past few months, I've made various criticisms and observations on the state of rock and metal and our declining relevance in the broader culture. And I've given a few of my thoughts as to why I think heavy music has declined in popularity in the last 10 or 15 years. However, there is one big reason that I've only addressed in passing. That being young women. It's no secret that rock and metal can be a bit of a sausage fest, and that's actually a problem. You see, young women, especially the 15 to 25-year-old demographic, are the single most important demographic if you want any kind of cultural relevancy. Without them, you are doomed to irrelevancy and obscurity. They are the main drivers of culture and cultural change, whether that be music genres and styles, fashion, or even linguistic change.
But language irresistibly changes. People want to sound different from their elders. They want to sound smart, and they also want to sound fashionable, right? There's always that kind of subtle pull and push of I want to sound like the cool people. I don't want to sound like the uncool people. And one interesting thing that you can observe is that very often women lead language change a little bit more than men do. Men will often be a little bit more in the past. Often, and this is not just a casual observation, often what happens there is that men more slowly come to adopt new features because they're trying to impress the women, right? And so women in a particular generation will typically lead change that men follow maybe a half generation after, because we just want to, impress you.
Now, this is a demographic that we have had in the past, but have since lost in the last 15 or so years. These Japanese girl groups are the perfect antidote for that. Not just because, more girl groups in general can draw in more young women, but also because, unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware of how much K-pop, and to a lesser extent J-pop, have been blowing up in the West, alongside other forms of Asian media like dramas and movies. There are a lot of young people now who have practically grown up on Japanese and Korean entertainment. And this is the first time in 15 or so years that rock and metal has actually had some crossover appeal with the broader cultural zeitgeist. There's a lot of potential here to see a new wave of metal fans and a resurgence in popularity. And this is why I hate all of the talk and rhetoric around posers, as if anyone is pretending to like heavy music in order to impress some sweaty neckbeard on r/metal. You're not protecting the sanctity of the culture by being a gatekeeping curmudgeon. You're just slowly suffocating it and depriving it of the oxygen it needs to survive. And on top of all that, it's just generally cool to see a new demographic get involved in the music. I, for one, am curious what new influences, sounds, perspectives, and ideas these women can bring to heavy music. And I'm sure for Japanese women, rock and metal can be a nice outlet when living in such a conservative and rigid culture, especially for the women. And these are not just thoughts that I have. I'm also saying this based off of personal experience. I have already seen the impact that the inclusion of women can have on the success and relevancy of a culture that I'm a part of, that being the world of PC gaming and related interests like esports, cosplay, and live streaming. Now, for most people who are not involved in that world, they probably imagine it much like that of heavy music, a bunch of hairy white guys with questionable hygiene choices. And while not entirely wrong, in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen an influx of women, particularly Asian women, into the space. In fact, I think it would actually surprise people just how many Asian women are into PC gaming. Like, you could go find a group of the most basic bitch, boba drinking, raving ABGs imaginable, and like half of them probably still have a gaming PC and spend way too much time and money on Valorant. Or if you look at a platform like Twitch, it was, up until very recently, dominated by Asian women. And is it any coincidence that in that same time period we saw gaming, live streaming, esports, and other related hobbies quadruple in size? I think not. I just want to end this video by saying that this is the first of 3 videos where I talk about the future of heavy music and what's looking up for the genre, with the last video being what you guys think, whether that be any thoughts on these first 2 videos themselves, or if you have any ideas or thoughts on what we might be seeing here in the near future that you think is a positive trend in heavy music. Please leave a comment below. You might make it into that video, but otherwise, that's it for today.